My name is Kenneth. I'm a front-end lead at Linkfire based in Copenhagen, Denmark. We connect fans with entertainment, and we do that with ember.js. And that sounds super vague, but I'm going to tell you more in the break if you want. I'm also a member of the Ember Learning core team, and I'm a co-editor of the Ember Times. Now, this is a really cool newsletter, and you should all subscribe. At home, I have internet access, so you can follow me at Kenneth Larsen and on my website as well. If you're not quite convinced to subscribe to the Ember Times, I have a quote for you. I reread the Ember Times every single day. Simply makes me a better human being. Tom Dale. Now, Tom didn't exactly say this, but I'm pretty sure if I asked him for a quote, this is exactly what he was going to say. So this talk is about community documentation. And what does that even mean? Well, for us, that means Ember add-ons. So I'm going to take you on an exciting journey in 3 parts. I'm going to have a look at why it's even important to begin with. And then we'll have a look at the state of community documentation. And lastly, how can we improve it? So why is it important? Well, for a lot of people, documentation is the first encounter you'll ever have with an Ember add-on or a project. If I need an Ember add-on or decide on which Ember add-on I need, I'll have a look at the README. And it's something we really notice once it's lacking, because then we have to go into source code or simply just give up. It's truly important for new developers. Not only are they trying to learn web development, they're trying to learn Ember as a framework, they're trying to learn having a job in the tech industry, and they're also trying to learn 100 different Ember add-ons. And as a business, it really makes sense. Like, you would always pick a framework or a software that has decent documentation over something that doesn't. But speaking of documentation, it's always interesting to ask yourself, well, who's responsible for this documentation? So if I buy proprietary software, I expect documentation to be included and maintained by whoever I buy it from. Now, I might get some community tutorials and stuff like that, but that's only because people on the internet are super nice. So JavaScript frameworks, React, Vue, Ember, I expect that there's a team to facilitate documentation, but in the end, it's the community that contributes with the documentation. But what about add-ons? Well, I don't really know, to be honest. There's a common misunderstanding that it's the maintainer who is solely responsible for the documentation. And I'm not sure that's quite fair. There's a lot of work in being a maintainer. And once an add-on is out there, it's a gift to the community. So we're all responsible for the add-on documentation. OK. Well, how does it look? What's the state? And before we get way too deep into this, I want to have a look at something I did a while ago. I scraped every single tweet with the ember.js hashtag. And I want to go back and look, well, when did we start talking about add-ons in Ember? So this is the first ever tweet about an Ember add-on. And it's about migrating from Sprout Core to ember.js. And this is, what, 7 years ago? So one of the very crucial parts of our ecosystem is now, as well, 7 years old. A lot of things have happened. And then if we look a bit further, we'll see this tweet from 2014, so 5 years ago. There were 96 add-ons available in the entire ecosystem. I don't know if that's impressive or not. I can't really remember that time. But today we have more than 5,000. There's roughly 1,000 new add-ons a year, which is quite impressive. OK, so add-on documentation, what is it? Well, for most people, it's the README file. And that's not the best thing in the world. A great README should serve as a nice introduction to your add-on or your project. It shouldn't really be the place where you answer every single question in the world. So there are some things we could do to make the README a bit nicer, a bit cleaner. One of the things are badges. Badges are super nice. Like the npm package version is nice. You can easily see, well, what is the latest version of this add-on. Ember Observer is really, really cool. I think of it like a health report for your add-on. So back in Copenhagen, when I visit a restaurant, at the door, there's a health report with a smiley face. That smiley face can be truly happy, and then I know I want to eat there. It can also be quite sad. And then I have to figure out how hungry I am. Ember Observer can sort of do the same thing for your add-on. It's truly nice. The same with maintainability badges, like code climate and stuff like that. But they are not as nice always. So this one is from Ember Data. And if Ember Data was a restaurant, I had to be quite hungry to eat there. It has a great C. But I really like Ember Data, and I think it's an amazing tool. So it doesn't always reflect reality. Then there's code coverage badges, and they are really nice for a couple of reasons. One, as a business, when you decide on which tool to use, it's nice to clearly see that this is well tested, so whenever they upgrade, they might not break my application. But also, it's a one-click adventure for new contributors who need to find areas to start contributing. So missing tests is a great way to get into a code base. But readmes, they are very cluttered, and they are filled with code examples. And when you have to dive into this big world of add-ons, this is super confusing. So I'm going to show you an example from the community that has caused double maintaining of documentation, because some of it lives in the README, some of it lives elsewhere. It's hard to find clear installation instructions. So this is Ember Data. Let's just have a look. It should play. Yeah, if you ask me, that's way too long. And so did they. So thankfully, the next slide is the README now, and it fits in one slide, like this. And to me, this is the perfect example of a README. It's nice and clear. There's links to investigate Ember Data a bit more, badges, clear installation instructions. This is, to me, super nice. But then, how did we get this cluttered? Well, when we generate a new add-on, we actually generate a lot of things in the README. And one of the things are a section on contributing. And while this is super relevant for some people, for most people using an add-on, they'll never need to know about this. This should live somewhere else, like in a contributing markdown file. We also do this when we generate a new add-on. Encourage people to write long descriptions, lots of code examples within the README, and maybe it shouldn't live there. There are other tools to do this kind of documentation, and I'll show you a bit further away in the talk. So I gave this talk at Ember Festival in Amsterdam last year, and then on Discord, Tobias from the CLI core team reached out and said he actually agreed with this. And then he had this amazing advice to me. It's quite hard finding an argument against that. So if you generate an add-on today, actually this whole contributing information is moved to a contributing markdown file. And that's nice for a couple of reasons. So one is it frees up some space, but also GitHub is powered to detect these files. So if you're a first-time contributor, you'll see this badge with a link to the actual information on how to contribute. If you've contributed before and the documentation has changed, GitHub will also let you know that since the last time you were here, some new stuff has happened, and you should check it out. Now to the fun part. What I did was I wrote some pretty sick Ruby that allowed me to scrape every single README of every single Ember add-on and save it in a format I would later regret. So I wanted to look a bit on, well, what kind of analysis can we do on this? What are the patterns in our documentation? So first of all, I wanted to look at common phrases, common words used together, what's really the significant part of our documentation. So here is a beautiful graph of the most commonly used words together in the Ember add-on documentation. It's more or less blueprint everything. And you might think, well, that's probably because the blueprint is amazing and sufficient. But when I had a manual look at all of the readmes, it was pretty clear that it's because people just stick with the blueprint and might not get around to ever update their documentation. So let's have a look at some of the common combinations. This is the first place, basically, test plus run. This has nothing to do with your add-on other than contributing information how to run tests locally when you want to develop the add-on. But still, it's the most popular combination of words. Then there's npm install. You might think, this is nice. This is the second most popular. It's clear installation instructions. We need stuff like that. Thing is, that's not how you install an Ember add-on. That's how you install dependencies locally when you want to develop on the add-on. So it should also not be there. But if we look a bit away from all the blueprint stuff, we found some nice things. So 8th most popular, score plus observer. This means that a lot of people developing add-ons uses the Ember observer badge in the README, and that is super nice. That's the health report. We need that. 4th most common, controller plus extend. Now, this is code example stuff, things that probably shouldn't live in your README to begin with. And then a bad boy. 10th most popular. We have a lot of code examples with model attributes, and of course they shouldn't live there, but it introduces new issues because almost every single model attribute used in Ember add-on documentation contains transforms. And now, it's not about whether or not transforms are good to use or bad to use. It's about all of these examples don't need transforms, but yet we introduce them. So on one hand, we overcomplicate our documentation. On the other hand, we introduce a new concept, transforms, where it isn't needed, and we don't explain it. And every time I talk to new Ember developers, they often think transforms are types. And if you introduce a concept like this and don't explain it, it really looks like types. So I think this is one of the key issues in terms of misunderstanding transforms. And now, the next thing I found was, for me, the most mind-blowing of all. It's so popular, and I couldn't quite figure out why. This is everywhere in our add-on documentation. And I mean, Robert Jackson, Yehuda, you are so way down there at Tom Dale. And I was like, why? Why is this? So I had to spend some time, investigate this, and it turns out that if you have an example, use Tom Dale. So in the world of Ember add-ons, Tom Dale is the human foobar. So besides the common words, I managed to do some other kind of language analysis. And one of the things I did was have a look at unhelpful phrasings. So things like simply run the test, just type npm test, just write your own compiler, then it simply works. Things that are sort of relative to the user's knowledge and where you kind of assume a certain skill level, it makes you sound a bit arrogant and it's not super helpful. So I found 995 cases of unhelpful words. You might think that's a lot, but it actually was 0.07% of all words, which is nice-ish, but we want to make it 0, right? So some of the words you have to be aware of are just, simply, simple, actually, easy, easily, obviously. They will in no way help your documentation, and they will make you sound like an ass. Then there is a thing like inconsiderate writing, so gender-favoring, polarizing, race-related, religion inconsiderate, or other unequal phrasings. And this is really difficult with programming, because on one hand, we're not a community known to be super inclusive, but also programming has an unfortunate vocabulary by default. So when running the tests on our documentation, I found 2,359 cases of inconsiderate writing. Some of this is just poor judgment. Some of it is programming has an unfortunate vocabulary. And some of it is programming terms that we might look into changing. And every time we talk about things like that, it's always been like this. Don't change anything. I'm old. And I'm not saying that you should change these things. I'm just saying these are examples I found in our documentation, and there's an easy alternative. So one is master-slave. It's just not super nice. Primary replica is not only less offensive, it's also a more precise term for the actual concept. And I think the same goes for whitelist. Blacklist, allow list, deny list is, first of all, more precise and less offensive. Then something that's a bit harder to measure is cultural differences. But they do exist. Open source is made by people all around the world, and I'm going to tell you a personal story of me messing up. So, as you know, I write for the Ember Times, and I was writing a section about the great work that Jen Weber has been doing on the Ember CLI documentation, and it was a bit stressful work. I had to finish this up. And what I do is I translate stuff from Danish to English in my head and just write it, and went through the pull request, and I wrote this, make Ember CLI documentation great again. I did not consider any political connotations for this, since that's non-existing where I live, and it's with the translation in my head. It might sound like a joke even, but it wasn't. But it went through the pull request, and it went out to all of our subscribers, and I went to bed. And when I woke up, Jen made a pull request fixing my wordings to be less offensive. And now Jen is not only a core team member, she's also one of my open source heroes. So I started getting a bit sweaty hands. Then I scrolled down a bit in the pull request and saw Melanie and Robert Jackson agreeing. And I thought, okay, I need some water. So calmly I just, got a drink and thought, what the hell have I done, right? So it turns out that there are simply just things that I hadn't considered as a Dane that might offend a lot of American people. And that's an issue, and it's really hard to fix. I mean, wordings, we can just change them and detect them early on. Maybe with free and equal access to school would help, but not every country is quite there yet. Yeah, thanks. Also, it didn't help for me anyway, so. Yeah, so going back to some of the data and the add-on documentation, I had a look at on how we talk about gender in the documentation. It wasn't as bad as some of the other things, but there is quite a high amount of he, his, guys, and dude. And that can be quite exclusive if you don't, excluding if you don't identify as dude. So that's something we should obviously try to avoid. There was also one add-on maintainer who maintained 2 add-ons and managed to use the word horseshit in both in different ways. And while that surely is impressive, it's also incredibly unnecessary. Yeah, so the state, let's sum it up. The readmes are too cluttered. The blueprint documentation needs some adjustment. It had some, but maybe there's still some things to do. We need a separate space for documentation. We're doing okay with inclusive writings. And then cultural differences will always exist, so be aware. So how can we prove it? Well, earlier I mentioned a fix for storing all your code examples and things like that. And the add-on EmberCLI add-on docs is perfect for this. It's an amazing add-on. It turns your dummy app into a beautiful documentation site where you can write Markdown, you can have interactive component demos, auto-generated API documentation, and on each page there's a nice link that takes you to GitHub where you can create a pull request to edit the documentation. And it's really nice, and it's becoming a standard in the community. So once you've seen one of them, you've seen them all, and you know how to navigate them. Then there's a tool called retext assuming. This sort of works like a linter to catch unhelpful phrasings. So if you just install it, then it simply works, and that's super nice. Then there's a tool called Alex, and also exists as EmberCLI Alex. It's a tool as well, like a linter that can catch inconsiderate writing, unoffensive writing. We actually use it on the Ember blog as part of a CI. So if I in the future mess up again, the CI will simply break, and it will highlight some of the words that might be of concern, and then I can have a look at it, either see that it's not an issue or fix it. Because the thing with Alex is, while it's a really good tool, it doesn't understand context. So you as a human being have to go in there and have a look. And actually the next slide is an example I found with Alex. Be careful with Canadian, it's profane in some cases. While that may be true, I mean, it maybe not always is, and I at least know of some people who are truly proud to be Canadian. So to sum up, documentation is so crucial for a healthy community, and we are all responsible for the add-on documentation. The readmes are currently way too cluttered, and the level of considered writing is good, but can be improved. And there are tools to help you out there, so use them and make them default. Thank you.